If you're one of the actual way back OGs on this channel, you probably know that one of my earliest videos was reviewing Assassin's Creed Revelations. It's a game I'm sure that I will get back to at some point and review again in the modern era, but this series, the 5 things it did right, 5 things it did wrong, also sometimes I call it retrospective reviews, are essentially me asking you what kind of game you want me to review. Then I go back and I play through the whole thing, and I try to look at it through the scope of when it came out, but also of today. Kind of a best of both worlds situation. So I want to look at Assassin's Creed 1. This game has been out forever, I'm sure you know, and it has become a mainstay, one of the biggest franchises out there now, but at one point it was just a simple game. These are some things that I absolutely love about the first Assassin's Creed. The first thing that I love about this game is that the time period really makes you feel like you're living through the Crusades. It takes place around 1191 AD, it's during the Third Crusade, and there definitely is an attention to details. Now, I am not a history major, that is not my forte. I only know bits and pieces, from what I learned in college and high school and in independent study, but it really does come across as fairly factual. There are a lot of liberties taken, obviously. It's a piece of fiction, but the areas are real. I don't think they're one-to-one, like if there's a house here, it was here. Like there's a lot of liberties taken. But the point is that this game feels true to the heart of the time period and where you are. This takes place in the Middle East. You can travel between a lot of different cities: Damascus, Jerusalem, Acre, I think it's pronounced, even though it's spelled how we'd say acre now. There's a few other locations here. I don't know. It's just very impressive to me. Like, every city feels uniquely different while also existing in the same world. It's not like Super Mario where you jump from one world into another world and you're like, oh, this is totally different. It's still in the same planet, like it feels like it is. It's not so video gamey that you feel foreign when you go to a different area. They connect, but they all have their own culture. And there were limits to this at the time. There's a lot of reused assets, a lot of reused character models, but the way that they are able to bring you into this world and hold you there, at least for me, really did impress me going back to this, especially for a game that has been out for like a decade. I mean, it's pretty impressive. The game also still looks really good in a lot of areas. And I will say, full disclosure, I played this on Xbox One X. It is enhanced for that console. The easiest way to compare it would be essentially a PC port. And I know PC users, there's a lot of better stuff on PC if you play this game there. But what I'm trying to say is that this is a beautiful middle ground between the release console and the PC. There's a lot of textures that still look fantastic. This has been enhanced for the Xbox One, so if you see it here and you think, wow, this looks great, it looks infinitely better on PC. And that's actually sort of impressive to me for a game that is not actually stylized in a cartoony way. This isn't Borderlands, this isn't Telltale. It's not a game in that almost cel-shaded or cartoony style that is able to just, if you like port it up or patch it up or outbrez it, however you want to say it, into the next higher definition, that will just keep looking good. This is something that work went into in order to make it this way. And you can definitely see that work has gone into it since its release to clean everything up. I also think that even though we're at this point in this series, and this is definitely a rock and a hard place I had playing this, was I was trying not to compare it to future games in the series quite as much, because I don't think that's super fair. But climbing has come a long way in this franchise. However, I was really surprised how functional it still was. It's slow. Climbing is very deliberate. You have to sort of take your time, and there are a lot of buildings where you can just hold right trigger and forward on to go up, and you don't have to think too much. But there are certain other ones where you have to make pretty precise jumps actually from one wall to another in order to make it up the building. It's not like later games where you can just use something like the hook blade or pretty much sprint up the side of a building without any effort. This was very manual at the time, and I am honestly impressed that it holds up so well. I mean, the climbing in this, it holds up better to me than something like the first Infamous game's climbing. I love that game, but it got really mashy and there was a lot of like just repetitive jumping in that. And this, I think, it's been held as a gold standard for climbing, I think, since this. And it's definitely worth pointing out that this game deserves credit for that. It's still so functional, and it's honestly impressive. It's not something that's easy to jump to if you've played way later games of the franchise, but if you are starting this series, 1 is definitely worth your time to actually check out. Probably the biggest thing that held me in this game that really made me want to beat it was the main assassin, Altair. He's really awesome. This is an excellent character in terms of his writing, and I think for me, it's a little hard to impress me with game stories. I think game stories can be unreal, but a lot of the time they sort of come across as budget movies or as just a loose glue holding gameplay together. And this game doesn't feel that way. There are things that I would change about the story that I'll definitely get to in part 2 of the review, but in terms of positives, honestly, Altair goes through so much growth between the beginning of the game where you start and the end of the game. And I don't want to give you the full breakdown of the very ending or anything, but you really start as, I will say, this character who is very full of himself, who believes that he knows everything, that he's above the rules, and in fact, the rules should bend to serve him, essentially, instead of him to serve them.
To what end?
Do you remember, Altair, what it is the assassins fight for?
Peace. In all things.
Yes, in all things. It is not enough to end the violence one man commits upon another. It refers to peace within as well. You cannot have one without the other.
So it is said.
So it is! But you, my son, have not found inner peace. It manifests in ugly ways. You are arrogant and overconfident.
Were you not the one to say that nothing is true and everything is permitted?
You do not understand the true meaning of the phrase, my child. It does not grant you the freedom to do as you wish. It is a knowledge meant to guide your senses. It expects a wisdom you clearly lack.
That's the whole thing with the Assassin's Creed. The Assassin's Creed is this list of rules that the assassins live by. This group of people who, they do kill a lot of people, but essentially are trying to stabilize regions of the world and trying to better serve the people by preserving freedom. That's why the Templars are a main villain throughout this whole series, is that the Templars and the Assassins both want a better world, but the Assassins they believe that better world needs to be taught. They believe that better world needs to be nurtured. The Templars believe that a better world must be seized. So the Assassins tend to go out of their way, and I'm really generalizing here, in order to kill threats to that freedom and to that better world, while the Templars do the same, but it's in order to establish an order, in order to put themselves on top and sort of rule downward, which the Assassins don't really want. They want to live in the crowd and move among the people. It's definitely a different sort of ideology, and there's a lot of battles of ideology in this game. And Altair is a character who really goes through the ringer when it comes to that ideology. I mean, at first, he's a high-ranking assassin who doesn't really believe in the Creed anymore. Like I said, he believes it serves him, that he can sort of bend it to his will, and that he knows best. He doesn't think the Creed is something to be sought after or followed as much as it is a loose guideline. There are a lot of events in this game that really humble Altair, the main character, and sort of push you more and more down this road to realizing that you don't know anything. Like, you are just a cog in the machine, just a piece of the bigger puzzle, and that there's a lot more going on outside of you. It's a really humbling story, and I think that it's an interesting character study of a character who has very clearly lost his way at the beginning and has to sort of be humbled and brought back in. The final thing that I really liked about this game, and it's another thing that held my interest despite certain gameplay issues I really had with this game as it has aged, but this was the layers to the story. Now, I already did address that Altair goes through all that growth. I talked about that. I talked a little bit about the Templars and the Assassins, and obviously the past, that's where the game takes place, but that's the real twist, isn't it? The game doesn't just take place in the past. And later games have moved away from this aspect of the Assassin's Creed series, but at one point, there was a predominant current day storyline in the Assassin's Creed franchise. It started here with Desmond Miles. This idea of secret societies still alive in the world today.
What does Abstergo have to do with the DMV?
Desmond, these guys are everywhere. I'm sorry, I really can't talk about it.
Your ancestors almost had the right idea, Mr. Miles. If the deaths of a few people, evil people, no less, could save the lives of thousands more, well, it seems a small sacrifice.
What do you mean, almost?
They didn't go far enough. To use a rather tired analogy, corruption is no different than cancer. Cut out the tumors, but fail to treat the source and, well, you're buying time at best. There's no true change to be had without comprehensive, systemic intervention.
Chemo for the masses.
Education, re-education, to be more precise. But it's not easy, and it doesn't always take.
I mean, the whole living in the past, the whole going into Jerusalem and Damascus, this is done through a machine called the Animus. Essentially what it does is reads your DNA, it pulls out your ancestors' memories, which are technically stored in your DNA in this universe, and there has been conflicting science in real life to say that is or is not likely true. So there are sci-fi elements here drawing from real science too. And that player character then will go back and relive their ancestors' memories. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, Desmond is a modern day assassin. I mean, he is from that group of people. And the war between the Templars and the Assassins has raged and raged and raged for hundreds and hundreds of years, like 1,000 years at this point almost. And actually more than that, because technically later games would go back and establish games that took place way before this, like Odyssey, or even Origins. But this game is sort of, because of its 1191 AD setting, it's about, 815 years before the game's modern day setting of when this came out. So yeah, so it's sort of jumping back and forth between being confined and a prisoner in this modern day Templar enclave and going back and living out your ancestors' memories. I mean, this two-dimensional, and it's really three-dimensional, but the fact that there is more than one dimension to the story is what I'm trying to say, really did add depth to it. I think it's something that later games in the franchise really lacked, as they sort of lost a bit of that direction. And I think that part of that is because it seems like Ubisoft realized that the ultimate endpoint of this franchise, where they were heading in later games, would have ended the series, so they kind of toned that back and just went into the past. I don't know. I appreciate this approach, and I was pretty impressed by it. I didn't remember everything from it, and I'm glad you guys suggested that I play through this. So hey, that was part one of my retrospective review of Assassin's Creed 1. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this and comment. Some of these videos about older games, it's really hard to get them to actually pick up any traction and get seen by people. So while I love making the video, I definitely make it to be watched by people and enjoyed. So, share this around. It means a lot to me, and I appreciate all of you. I'll see you online. Have a fantastic one.